sun is shining, the bars are packed, many people are gearing up for their summer holidays. That is an oasis of normality, you might say. And very easy to forget that just 3 years ago, the world had become a very different, very lonely, quite deadly place. As COVID ripped through this country, Boris Johnson ordered us to do this.
You must stay at home.
What followed in the subsequent months were countless stories of unimaginable grief and sacrifice. Remember this little boy, Ismail, aged 13, buried alone by men in hazmat suits because his mother and siblings were ordered to self-isolate. The late Queen sat masked and alone as she mourned her husband of 73 years. Boris Johnson's government plastered posters of dying COVID victims across the country with the words, "Look in the eyes and tell her you never bend the rules." But Boris Johnson bent the rules, and most of his staff bent the rules. And regardless of what you now think of those rules with the benefit of hindsight, Boris Johnson was the man who made those rules and ordered the rest of the country to follow them. Today's report by the Privileges Committee, the result of a year-long investigation into whether he lied to Parliament about breaking his own rules, is excoriating. There's a lot in it, and the conclusions are damning. I'll come to those. But for me, the whole thing is summed up by this jaw-dropping first-hand testimony submitted as evidence by a Downing Street official. I'm going to read it in full so that you can understand exactly what this report says. This person who worked at Number 10 said during the pandemic, Number 10, despite setting the rules to the country, was slow to enforce any rules in the building. The press office wine time Fridays continued throughout. Social distancing was not enforced. Mask wearing was not enforced. I once inquired to, redacted name, in March 2020 whether we should be wearing masks and was told the science advice was there was no point and it had very little effect on the spread of COVID. This was all part of a wider culture of not adhering to any rules. Number 10 was like an island oasis of normality. Operational notes were sent out from a security team to be mindful of the cameras outside the door, not to go out in groups and to socially distance. It was all a pantomime. One of those booze-soaked parties took place on the night before the late Queen sat alone to mourn her husband, with the rest of the country banned from socialising. Staff inside the building where he lived and worked continued to party while the rest of the country and much of the world gave up everything to keep each other safe. And when the truth came out, which it always does in the end, Boris Johnson did what Boris Johnson does best. He lied.
I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken, and that is what I have been repeatedly assured.
Just a massive lie. The investigation into whether he lied was carried out by 7 MPs, 4 of them Conservatives, who were all Brexiteers. They say he's guilty of deliberately lying to Parliament and their committee multiple times. They say he leaked details of the confidential report when it was sent to him last week, then mounted a campaign of abuse and attempted intimidation against his colleagues. And if he hadn't already resigned in disgrace, he'd be facing an unprecedented 90-day suspension. Now he faces being banned from the parliamentary estate altogether. Remember, this isn't some rogue backbench moron. This was the Prime Minister. And his response today, as ever, is to cry conspiracy and blame everybody else. This is rubbish, he roars. A lie, a deranged conclusion, a kangaroo court, patently absurd. Boris Johnson has now become Donald Trump with a thesaurus. The fact is that Boris is a serial liar who's been sacked from 2 previous jobs for lying. He's now lying about the people who've exposed his lies and calling them liars. This report is 108 pages long, 30,000 words of shame, and it is a shameful read. It's shameful for Boris Johnson, and it's shameful for this country. Most former prime ministers go into the annals of history. Boris, frankly, can get in the bin. Well, joining me now is TalkTV's political editor, Kate McCann, and the former special advisor to Boris Johnson, Alex Crowley, who received an OBE in the former Prime Minister's resignation honours list. And I'm also joined remotely by the historian and author of Johnson at Number 10, which is, in its own way, an excoriating account of Boris Johnson, Sir Anthony Seldon. So welcome to all three of you. Kate, Boris appears to have gone full nuke Trump. He's attacking the institution. He's saying it's all a witch hunt, it's all lies. This is real Trumpian stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And actually, I don't think that's the only element that is causing concern in his statement today. He mentions Rishi Sunak by name, and his supporters are doing the same thing. Now, there's a reason for that they are seeking to envelop Rishi Sunak, the current Prime Minister, and others who were in office at the time, in everything that goes along with this report, to suggest that anything that Boris Johnson knew, Rishi Sunak knew too. That's going to make his life incredibly difficult, the Prime Minister's. But it also, as the report indicates, it has an effect on democracy, and it is already having an impact within Parliament, within the Conservative Party. There are those MPs now who were talking about suggestions that the committee members, those Tories on the committee, may well be parachuted into safe seats. Nadine Dorries has said as much, that she'll be keeping a close eye on what happens next.
Well, you interviewed her today. Let's just take a quick look at the clip from that.
It is actually the case that this report smells as though something is quite wrong. 90 days suspension. 90 days. It is far more than even Boris Johnson's worst critics thought would happen. Even his worst critics were saying, maybe he'll get 20. We're hoping he'll get 20. Even they are utterly amazed that he got 90 days. There is something very untoward about what has happened in this report.
Yeah, here's the thing, though. He didn't get 90 days originally. They made it worse because of his attack on Parliament, on the institution, on all his MP colleagues, right? I mean, that's why he got 90 days.
Yeah, there's a huge extra section of this final report which details exactly why they have chosen to do that. It talks in this report about the attack on the committee carrying out its remit from the democratically elected House amounts to an attack on our democratic institutions. They are taking this in itself very seriously. They're saying that actually that is a serious further contempt, which is why they added to that original penalty, which we believe was around 40 days and then was...
Right, so they more than doubled it because of his ridiculous antics since he's read the report. He's read the report, he's seen how bad it is, and he's gone full Trump, which is to attack the institution which has created this supposed attack on him, when in fact it's a very well-researched and detailed report by a committee that is dominated by his own Conservatives.
Yeah, and I think anybody who reads this report, you know, look, you can go back and forth. The clip that you showed of him in the House of Commons there, where he is accused of misleading the House, he actually said no COVID rules were broken. In this report, he does concede actually what he meant to say was guidance. He also says he was told repeatedly, and he concedes in the report that he wasn't. There are a number of different things like that scattered throughout these pages, whereby he said that the gathering in the garden was because the Cabinet Secretary had resigned, but the Cabinet Secretary actually resigned a month later. When you add all of those things up, clearly those writing this report have done so knowing that it will be absolutely heavily criticised by Boris Johnson's supporters. But I think when you read it, you conclude ultimately, as they do, that he did mislead the House, and not just that, but he was deliberately disingenuous in doing it.
Yeah, he's a liar. Alex Crowley, you got an honour in the resignation. I don't think anyone should have got any of these honours, right? I don't think if you're a prime... It's just a separate issue. But I just think if you leave as Prime Minister in shame and disgrace, why are you getting to have an honours list? I mean, what do you think of that argument, above anything else?
Well, look, I mean, it's a very odd quirk of our constitutional system that a Prime Minister who leaves office, either with a great reputation or a terrible reputation, gets to nominate people for honours. And, of course, their successor has to sign it off. Their successor, of course, doesn't have to sign it off. There's nothing in law that says their successor...
Do you feel comfortable... You got an OBE, right?
Yeah.
And this was for what?
Well, the official title is for political and public service. These are the sorts of things that I didn't know I'd got it till about 2 or 3 days ago.
What do you think you did to deserve it, out of interest?
Well, personally, I don't think I did a great deal to deserve it, because it's a massive honour, and I don't think of myself as that important. However, what I will say is that there are lots of people who work in politics for Labour, for the Tories, for all sorts of other political parties, and it is a public service. Now, you can criticise people that work in politics and say, well, they're all useless, they're all on the take, etc. But you have to have people working for those parties, for those institutions, in order for us...
OK, but you've been given this honour by somebody who, frankly, is in total meltdown now. He was found guilty in... Like we keep using this word, excoriating. What that means is it's like the most extreme language you could imagine from a Conservative-dominated committee about their own Prime Minister from their own party. I've never read anything quite like it. You can't surely still be defending the guy.
No, look, to be absolutely clear... No,
You're not defending him?
I'm not defending him. No, I'm not defending him.
Oh, great.
Right, OK.
OK.
Well, hang on.
So you agree then?
No, let me finish, right? OK, so a bit of nuance here. That's something you might be familiar with, right? He's got to carry the can for this. Of course he has. He doesn't
think so.
Well, OK, but I think
it's all a
else
witch hunt.
So.
Parliament is corrupt. It's all a witch hunt.
Yeah,
He's been stitched up. It's everybody else's fault, but it's the usual Boris playbook.
Exactly, but everyone
Do you
else...
agree with that?
Most of other people in the country say he's got to carry the can. However, I think there is one area where I think he does have a point, which is this. This is a political process, not a legal process. This is other politicians judging another politician. If you look at the severity of the punishment that they have dealt out to him, it is way beyond anything that anyone expected.
Really? Hang on. You've got...
Most people were saying 20 days.
Well, we are actually in unprecedented territory where we have a Prime Minister of this country who has gone to the House of Commons and brazenly lied. We've never, ever had that before. No Prime Minister in this country's history has ever done that. So this is well, they haven't. Well, they haven't been caught lying.
Well,
they haven't been. Well, hang on. They haven't been proven to be liars.
Tony
right?
Blair, 45 minutes.
Fine. There are lots of times you may have thought they were not telling the full truth, but he's the first Prime Minister where a committee of his peers inside Parliament have concluded he lied to Parliament deliberately, and that is. It's unconscionable.
Yeah, of course. No one's saying that's a good thing. It's a terrible thing, right? It is a terrible thing. But you've got to look at it with a little bit of perspective.
Why?
Well, because...
Why? He was breaking his own rules.
Of course, yeah.
Rules which meant the Queen had to mourn alone.
Yeah.
Meant that this little boy, Ismail, had to be buried alone.
Yeah.
I know countless people who had to say goodbye to their loved ones on FaceTime videos on their phone because of the rules that Boris Johnson set. Now we find out that every Friday was wine party time for his own press team. And he wants us to think he didn't know anything about it happening in his own building. Yeah, it's complete hogwash. He knew all about all this stuff. But look at him. He's there, leading these bashes.
Look, but the point
Hello, chaps, carry on. Don't worry about the rules for the little guys.
No, but the point is...
They don't apply to us.
He was punished for that because he lost his job as Prime Minister.
Yes.
That was, at that time, that's the worst thing.
So what are you actually defending him about?
What I'm saying is that
Sounds to me like you basically agree with me.
Well, I agree with you to a certain extent. Right?
I'm trying to work out what part of the extent you don't agree with me.
He should have carried the can, and he did. But I think this committee goes way too far.
So a bunch of Tories basically have been, partisan against him?
Yeah, but you and I both know your worst enemies are sat behind you, not opposite you in the House of Commons. It's not good. It's not good enough to say just because it's Tories, they were always going to back him.
Right.
The fact is, a lot of people in the party never liked.
All right.